be speaking about the real estate investment opportunities. Please put your hand together as we invite Professor Pat to come to speak to us this morning. Can we celebrate him?
Thank you so much. Thank you. Please, let's be seated. Thank you. What a privilege to be here. I think that next time I see Tree Bitat, I'll be sure to know that this is the past, the present, and the future. Nothing thrills me more than seeing young entrepreneurs. Nothing. Because this is really the future of our civilization. One of the biggest challenges that I see around us is that there are too many young people who spend a lot of time complaining that the system is rigged against them. I like to consider that more an opportunity than a threat. That nature that we have to aspire, to continue to seek to be, is critical for understanding the essence of the real estate business and the fact that shelter is a fundamental human need. Yes, it's a fundamental human need, but the nature of that fundamental need will keep evolving, and that is what will shape real estate and investments in real estate. One of the interesting things about real estate is that there are few better stores of long-term value as real estate. I mean, if you have a real estate venture that you build a house, now the value that is stored in that house ordinarily continues to appreciate. 30 years, 40 years, 50 years from now, your house will be worth much more than when you built it. So real estate is a major store of long-term value. And so that makes it a unique kind of asset. The things that increase its value will keep depending, of course, the nature of the neighborhood, and all of those will keep the nature of the value. One of the things I'll speak to very briefly is that one of the biggest economic crisis the world has known in recent times exploded in 2008. It was the result of real estate investments in America. It's called the subprime crisis. And that happened because of this concept of continued improvement in value of real estate. People's real estate value just kept going up, kept going up, kept going up. The mortgage industry, and I'll talk a little bit about a company called Fannie Mae and how that changed America and how all of this played into the 2008 crisis. So, young, ambitious real estate salespeople sold houses to people who could not afford it. And they said to them, look, the way value is appreciating, it will appreciate so much that it doesn't matter the equity that is increasing, you can use it to finance paying for it. Even though your salary is $50,000 a year, and what it really takes to own this kind of house should be a salary of $200,000. Don't worry, the appreciation will help you. Now that's what then triggered the crisis, because at a point, American firms were able to sustain investment flows into America using that whole concept by packaging different kinds of risks into a bundle and selling those risks. And because it was America, the whole world was buying those as investments. And at a point in time, somebody decided, look, this is crazy, it's not sustainable. And once the plug was pulled, it led to what was called a contagion. And the speed of contagion affected global economies. It was called the subprime crisis. But we'll probably not go into the sophistication of the subprime deals and how it triggered a global economic crisis. But just to use it to make the point that real estate is a powerful way to invest because it gives you long-term value. You go around Rome, you will see these buildings that were built like 500 years or more ago, remaining the character of the way Rome looks like 500 years ago. When you enter inside the building, you will see the most modern apartment. So real estate can help you capture different kinds of value. That is capturing the value of tradition and modernity in one frame. And so this is an enormous value and continues to make your investment worthwhile. The other point is that real estate can provide you a source of regeneration of wealth. There's a Peruvian economist called Hernando de Soto. De Soto is particularly famous for a book titled The Mystery of Capital. De Soto's book essentially makes the point that in poor countries, we have lots of assets, but those assets do not lead to the regeneration of wealth because those countries do not have deep representational systems. What do they call representational systems? Land registry, where you go into Europe, there's a land registry that captures every piece of estate in Europe. There's value you can ascribe to every plot of land in Europe. Your great-grandfather may have left you one small parcel of farmland. That parcel of farmland in the remotest part of Holland has value, and you can take that to a bank as security, take out a second mortgage on it, and build a business. That is not happening in developing countries because they have not developed those land registries to those levels. This is what De Soto calls representational systems. And so the poor, as he argues, have assets, but their assets don't have the fungible value that it should have to make it easy to become capital. So their assets become dead capital. Part of the challenge of the real estate business is to drive our institution development to have that property of capital. So that if you have a house anywhere in Lagos, by the way, the man who wrote that book was invited to Engbeti a few years ago, Hernando de Soto, to speak to this subject. And the Lagos State government, at the time I was leading the thinking, driving the retreats of the cabinet of the Lagos State government on what to do to make Lagos a better place. Many of you may not recall because you are young. This Lagos that you are in was a terrible disaster. I mean, I described Lagos as the biggest dustbin in the world some years ago because everywhere was dirty. In fact, the waste disposal trucks were described by the Guardian newspapers as waste dispersal trucks. All of these things were part of things that planning has helped moderate. But part of that process was to create this economic summit system, and there's one coming up shortly in Betty. And one of those that were the keys, those speakers, was Hernando de Soto to speak to this subject. And that's why there's supposed to be an acceleration of effort to enable people to get their COOs and stuff like that to make their real estate assets more fungible and easy to convert into capital. Real estate is also wonderful because it's one of the surest way for transgenerational gifting. If you leave your children a house, it sure is one of the best things you can leave them. Leave them lots of the money in the bank. I mean, they can sell the house, all right, but they are more likely to quickly chop the money before you know it, they are in poverty again. So real estate, of course, it's a great measure of a country's capital stock. The ascendancy of Singapore was fundamentally driven by the HDB. HDB is the Housing Development Board of Singapore. That is where Singapore built up national savings that went into investments that led to Singapore's ascendancy. We tried to start a national housing fund in Nigeria. Unfortunately for us, we've not managed it as well as Singapore managed the HDB. So, why is all of this so important? For me, it's also important because our country needs to become more middle class if it is to become more stable. And the first count of the measure of the middle class is house ownership. People who have a house are more vested in the stability of that system. If you have nothing to lose, you don't have a house, anything can happen. In the US today, the easiest way to lose a presidential election is not to pay attention to mortgage rates, because the key to the US economy is housing markets. In fact, when I lived in the US in the 1970s, one of the biggest broadcasters in America, he was in fact described as the most trusted man in America in those days, was a CBS television news anchor called Walter Cronkite. He used to end the nightly news broadcast, but that's the way it is. Monday, 25th of February, 1972. I am Walter Cronkite. And what follows immediately is the number of houses they started constructing that day in America. Housing starts as a fundamental measure of economic performance. So, the middle class was typically measured by its houses. People don't sometimes realize that two things are central to the evolution of middle class as we know it today. In the past, the world was divided between extraordinarily rich people and very, very poor people. There was no middle. The Industrial Revolution created the capitalist class, and those who worked for capital were treated so badly that they became the source of the angst that was captured by Karl Marx in Das Kapital and the way that Europe was evolving. In fact, the church of the time, the Roman Catholic Church, began to take a position on social issues when in 1891, in the middle of that Industrial Revolution, a Pope called Leo XIII wrote a social encyclical titled Rerum Novarum on the state of the working people. And so, you were either very poor, working for capital, no leave, no decent income, but you had to survive on whatever they paid you. And the people who owned capital, who were so rich. How did this all begin to change? A man called Henry Ford in America was building motor cars, horseless carriages, as they used to be called, for the few extremely wealthy people. His workers wanted a pay raise, wanted to go on strike. And like all capitalists, he told them to go to hell. Then he went to sleep one night and woke up saying to himself, wait a minute, if all these people who are building these cars could afford to own cars, boy, we'll build so many more cars and we'll be richer. So when they were asking for a pay raise of something less than 1% that he was refusing, he came to work the next day and ordered a pay raise of nearly 100%. They decided that he had gone mad. This man has definitely gone mad. What they didn't figure was his reasoning at night. The Model T Ford suddenly was affordable by people who worked for Ford. And bang! What? As the income of Ford workers went up, other employers in America had no choice but to try and match Ford. And that's how the middle class, as we know it, began to emerge at the beginning of the 20th century. The next thing that drove the evolution of the middle class in America, and it became a global phenomenon, was that as World War II was ending, the President of the United States decided to create an opportunity for these emerging middle class people to be able to own their own homes. So they created a company called Fannie Mae, which then had a sister called Freddie Mac. And the hairy audacious goal of the early leaders of Fannie Mae was, these are the exact words, to democratize home ownership. To democratize home ownership. It means that in the philosophy of Fannie Mae, if you can vote, you should be able to own a home. That created a revolution in American business, in the quality of life in America, and solidly installed the middle class as the basis of human relationship. So, and I've already mentioned the subprime crisis as a downside of what would happen from experience. But let's look at how COVID-19 has fractured things, and I'll round up very quickly. First of all, COVID-19 has created a supply chain crisis. The fractured supply chain meant that the inputs you need for housing development, for example, have gone up because we are a dependent economy. We depend on China for many of these inputs and all of that. What is the consequence for the Nigerian economy? The consequence is that we have to realize that we have to produce most of our inputs into housing construction locally. One of the things I was doing the day before yesterday, I happened to be chairman of PAFTRAC. PAFTRAC is the African Union's private sector infrastructure and investment committee. And so, along with somebody in Nairobi, Kenya, the leading businessman in Kenya, the leading businesswoman in South Africa, who's the chairman of the Afrexim Bank, and a leading Egyptian businesswoman, we spoke to Africa's position on the WTO and what the new rules of international order should be. And part of these rules, and part of the way that I focus on it, is the facilitation of cross-border aggregation so that African companies can compete globally the way that the Chinese do, the way the Japanese did with Marubeni and Co. becoming global grand trading companies, the way that the Chaebols enabled South Korea to do. Those rules of the game on the international trading system are fundamental to Africa's future competitiveness, and those will bring down the kinds of costs that we have in exchange relations with China, for example, in housing materials inputs. In my view, therefore, a critical part of this moment is our recognition that we need to begin to save, and that those savings go into production. We have for too long emphasized consumption without production, and that has put the Nigerian economy in an awkward stand. If we can save, if we can put those savings into investments in raising housing stocks, and these become the stock of our national savings, we can leverage it into capital that can help the development of a rounded economy in which all of our children can be assured that we can extract from these circumstances a demographic dividend. We have a youth bulge. 60% of the population of Africa is between the age of 15 and 25. That is a huge economic advantage if we make the appropriate investments in their education, in their health, and there is enough capital for them to apply themselves. If we fail to do that, Africa will be down a disaster path. What are the choices we are making? When democracy was arriving in Nigeria in 1999, a couple of books hit the stands. An American called Robert Kaplan wrote a book, The Coming Anarchy, in which he projected West Africa's descent into anarchy from a convergence of cleavages in economics, cleavages in ethnicity, cleavages in religion. Another American, Stephen Ellis, wrote a book. It was titled The Present Darkness. And more books of terrible foreboding have been written. But I challenge always the youth of this country to say that you can turn all of this on its head. If you engage yourselves, if you take advantage of understanding the trends, pull the appropriate resources together and apply yourselves, Africa can truly be the future. This can be Africa's century, and it depends on you, and you. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.